Welcome to the Principal's Perspective, where we explore what it really takes to lead a school and why great leadership is a way of being and a set of skills that can be learned. I'm Dr. Adrian Camm.
And I'm Teagan Collins. Whether you're leading a school, an organisation, or preparing for your next leadership move, we're here to break down the strategies, challenges, and real-life moments that define leadership today.
This podcast is your guide to navigating leadership with clarity, confidence, and impact.
Let's get into today's episode.
All right, so the focus of this episode is personal effectiveness, or do what only you can do. And it's something that we've been increasingly talking about, Teagan, in terms of our distributed leadership approach, delegating to others, which by default empowers them, and making sure that we're prioritising the limited time that we have to do the things that only we can do in order to move the needle in the positive direction for the school.
But it can be really challenging because, one, you think, oh, should I delegate it, or will they think that I just don't want to do the work? And two, letting go of things that you think, I really want that to be done. But how can you empower someone else to do it if it should sit with them in the first place?
Right. And I know one of the things we've spoken about in that area is you're a perfectionist, Teagan.
Reforming, maybe, ish.
You like things done in a particular way. That's not to say you don't trust others, because you're a highly trusting leader, but you do like things done in a particular way. And sometimes it can be quicker for you to do it yourself because you're highly efficient as well, rather than delegate it to someone else. And they might get it done. It might take them longer. It might not be done quite to the standard that you're expecting. So that's a really difficult thing for you to grapple with.
Absolutely. I'm getting better though. And you really pushed me on this. You know, we think years ago when we started working together, you really pushed me on, you can't do it all. Or you can try to do it all, but there's going to be balls that you drop. You know, we talk about keeping the balls in the air and how low do you need to get to the ground to make sure the balls don't drop. But eventually one will. They're not glass balls, they're rubber, so they will bounce back up. But I've certainly embraced that element of... I find I'm challenged by the word delegating sometimes because for me it comes with the monkey on the shoulder of you're not working hard enough.
Has negative connotations.
Negative connotation to be delegated something. And then the negative connotation for the person picking that work up. But I like to reframe it around how do we empower other people? How do we empower them to step up into a position or into a task or into a strategic priority perhaps or project that's going to lead to benefit? And I think we've seen some great outcomes and great results of being able to empower people with the work.
Particularly if they're humble, hungry and smart, which is what we look for when we're recruiting new staff. We want people to be ambitious. And both you and I were ambitious young people when we started our careers. And if someone had delegated something significant to us to do, we would have grabbed it with both hands and just run with it because we would have saw it as an opportunity for growth, but also an opportunity to establish ourselves as aspirant leaders.
And I think that we were both blessed with excellent mentors throughout our time and through our careers, which for people who saw us and gave us those opportunities. So I think that's part of our practice of making sure we can give those opportunities to others, perhaps outside of their business as usual, outside of their portfolio to give them experience in another area. But that can also come with tension of perhaps other people who may like to operate in a more traditional siloed approach where, hang on a minute, why am I not doing that? That's my portfolio, or that comes under my remit. So there's a lot of people bouncing as well when we talk about this type of work.
Yeah, totally true in terms of that siloed mentality that still exists in schools and how a contemporary school environment is about breaking down those boundaries as much as anything else, delegating to people to do things that do sit with outside their business as usual, but also encouraging that collaboration across teams and across disciplines, which perhaps hasn't happened if we look back 20 or 30 years ago.
Absolutely. That authenticity, I suppose, is really important when we start talking about silos and portfolios and what we delegate and what we don't delegate, what should sit with us. You know, we talk about a lot, can someone else do this? Is this, and I suppose when we flip that too, is this the best use of my time? am I maximizing my output here, and am I having the most impact? And when we zoom out, if you like, and look at our roles when we're leading a large organisation, thousands of young people and their families, and the extension of that with stakeholders as well, how can we get the best return on our investment? Because if we are focusing on the small stuff, we're also not doing the role justice.
Yeah, that's right. And I know your executive assistant, as does mine, constantly questions. And so in many ways they're leading up by asking us those two very simple and yet very important questions. Is this something you should be doing, or is this something someone else should be doing? And I think we're constantly engaging in that pursuit of self-awareness, which we've often talked about, because we need to understand what our biases are and what our habits and behaviours are in order to change them. And I think back to, June last year, prior to you going on maternity leave, where we had this conversation around, creating a impact strategy, a personal impact strategy for leadership transformation in terms of who do we want to be as leaders? What do we want to be known for? And what do we need to leave behind in order to be the leaders that we want to be? And that's really important. And I think reflecting back on one of the key goals and outcomes that I was hoping to achieve was to delegate more effectively. And I had a KPI. It was just a random KPI, but it was to gain 6 hours of time back per week by delegating the things that I was currently doing that I shouldn't be. And I think that's still a work in progress for me, but I've definitely gotten better at it by having a very intentional focus on it.
The relationship with our EAs is so important, and it's more of a partnership, that really moving forward in what is a high-performing EA, what is their role, and how can we work together, and that's so critical. But 6 hours, what did you do with these 6 hours that you gained back?
Well, I didn't get 6 hours back, unfortunately. It's still a work in progress, but I needed to get out of my inbox because, let's face it, you can receive up to 300 emails a day. It's out of control sometimes. And so you could literally be behind your desk doing emails. Now, that's not the best use of my time. That's not going to move the needle in terms of advancing our school in different ways. So I needed to get out of my inbox. I needed to make sure I was having less meetings, but having a more productive focus on meetings, and move away from reactionary immediacy. So sometimes in schools, everything is urgent or everything's a priority, but it depends on what perspective you take. And so it's just making myself one step removed from that situation to make sure that I can assess it and determine whether it is something that needs to be addressed straight away, or whether it's something that I can delegate to others, or I can come back to at a later date.
And that can be hard in our context when you've got people at the door, emails flooding in, calls, this is urgent, needs to be dealt with now. How do we provide that space? Because we get a better decision.
Totally. And so some really practical strategies that I use, and I'd be really interested to hear what you do. We both are highly accessible, I'd like to think, in terms of our leadership. We do have that open door mentality most of the time, and we will get drop-ins and we will get people coming in and sharing with us a particular issue or something that's highly emotive, and we might be on our way to the next meeting. And so we have to develop some certain strategies that we can use with people to not dismiss them, because to them it might be something that's really important, but to make sure that they feel heard. And so it might be something as simple as, I can see you're highly emotional about this situation right now. I've actually only got 4 minutes. Is there someone else that you can talk to about this? Or can you make a time so we can come back and give it the time that it deserves? Now, sometimes, in my experience, probably more than half the time, that completely diffuses the situation right there and then, because the person only wanted to come in and vent, throw the monkey off their back onto yours, and then be on their way. So by just creating some space, by saying, I can see this is really important to you, let's try and give it the time it deserves, oftentimes they don't follow up.
It's perhaps that immediacy sometimes which they need, but it's also the framing of the conversation too, and something that we've challenged each other on and challenged the team on is, how do we empower people to walk away to be able to solve their own problems? And that's not to be dismissive or to minimise how they're feeling or what they're experiencing, but we know if that learned helplessness is too strong a word perhaps, but if everybody just keeps feeding up all their issues to you and I, it's not the most effective use of our time either. So we've done a lot of work on coaching and a lot of work in those conversations and encouraging and helping people to come to their own solutions, no triangles, cutting out the middleman and or woman, and being able to go to someone if they've got an issue and have that conversation. That takes a lot of time. That's taken us years to get to that point.
It has.
But we're getting better.
We are. And I think that's beautifully encapsulated in one of our leadership principles that we've recently developed in collaboration with our staff. One of those leadership principles is very explicit around killing your own snakes. And you might laugh at that, but it's deliberately emotive language that creates an image of, you can imagine snakes, slithering around and you've actually got to kill your own snakes. It means you take ownership, but it means that you've got the confidence and you're equipped with the skills, the tools, the attitudes, the dispositions to be able to confront an issue that you're having head on and be solutions focused. Now, we've invested heavily in equipping our staff with that capability, and it's now starting to pay dividends.
And the way that I can assess that is at the end of a meeting, and we have our one-on-one schedule with our direct team, and then you have your float-on meetings as well that pop into the calendar. At the end of that meeting, are you walking away with a long laundry list of things to do? Or is the other person walking away with more than what they came in with? And the balance has got to be there. There's always got to be things that we have to own or things that sit in our corner. But we can't just be the office of people coming in and us always walking away with more and more and more. And I remember this really pivotal point where I sat down with you and I said to you, I've got all these meetings and I'm in meetings all day, every day. And then come the end of the day, or technically whatever we call the end of the day after the event finishes at night and we go home, I've got this long list of things from all this follow-up to do with these meetings. How can I flip this around? And I distinctly remember that conversation and making sure that we can flip the script, if you like, with the people that we work with.
Well, one of the dangers and one of the things that you and I, it was quite habitual for us, is the saying, leave it with me. Well, maybe there are some things that only we can do and they do need to leave that with us. But probably 95% of the time, it shouldn't be leave it with me. It should be following up with others, delegating to others, making sure that whatever needs to be done is done.
And we want to be accessible. We want to be helpful. We want to help people and make sure they're feeling listened to and heard and understood and that they can be their authentic self with us. So it's hard not to say leave it with me and take it off their shoulders, but it's not going to end in the benefit that we all hope for if that's the way that we continue to operate.
Yeah, couldn't agree more. And let's just pick up on that authenticity piece again, because I think it's really important as a leader, as a principal, as an aspiring principal, that you are true to who you are. You have to believe wholeheartedly in what you do and why you do it. And you have to almost double down on your authentic self. Because otherwise, if you're pretending to be someone you're not, it's going to be exhausting. And two, I don't think there's longevity in that in terms of your career. So it's having self-awareness, recognising who you are, communicating that with others, but then recognising what your strengths are, playing to those, but then also identifying areas for growth and making sure you're not neglecting those as well.
Tasha Urich's work is so critical in this piece around self-awareness, and she's big on the critical friend, and without having to say, can you be my critical friend, we provide that for each other, which is important to have your people, like who are your 5 critical friends that you can go to. And that authenticity piece was, I suppose, or is so critical in some of the conversations and the work that we've done together, particularly for me, coming into this role thinking I had to be really stoic and I had to have the face on all the time and don't be too vulnerable and don't be too personal and don't open yourself up, which is not who I am. But it's this, I suppose, what some would say is that old style of leadership and the type of persona that I thought that I had to embody. And it took a long time to break that down. And sometimes it can still be hard to be vulnerable and you second guess, is this going to come back to bite me? And am I being too open here? But that authenticity is so critical.
Yeah, it's really interesting to reflect on, what are your strengths as a leader? And I think about not just my own self-reflection, because as an executive team, for instance, we've done a lot of work in this space around developing individual user manuals, which is a really critical self-reflection, a vulnerable self-reflection that you write on a page and then share with your colleagues so that they can get an insight into how you work. You know, what gives you energy? What depletes you? What can't you stand? You know, like what is going to drive you crazy? How do you like to be communicated with? You know, how do you like to make decisions? And really articulating that as an explicit piece of writing that you can share with others to short circuit getting to know each other, which sometimes can take years through trial and error.
Accelerate the people work.
Right. And that's one piece, I think, in terms of that authenticity, because you're sharing that in a vulnerable way with others. But I think it's also like getting other data points, right? So you talked about critical friends. I like to think of it as who's your board of directors, but also like whose board of directors are you sitting on in terms of your mentorship or the way that you're supporting others, and what do they have to say about it? What do you do a 360 survey, and how often, and how exposed do you feel when you engage your community in getting that level of detailed feedback, which is anonymous? It can be really scary. But I think I've gone through a process recently where it was really affirming in terms of highlighting some strengths. But it's also, for me, a reminder around some areas that perhaps I need to continue to work on, which...
What was one of those areas?
Visibility. So we've talked about that. Now, we've spent the last 18 months talking about visibility, developing visibility strategies, making sure we're visible to who, when, for how long. And yet visibility continues to come up as one of the areas that's an issue for me. It's not to say I'm not visible, but the feedback from the 360, for instance, was very much around, we'd love to see you out kicking the footy with kids at lunchtime more. I'd love to do that too. You know, but sometimes we just don't have the capacity or the time to be able to do that. So I think that's an issue. But I think going back to the strengths, because we need to be strengths-based, for me, I know who I am. And it was great to have that reflected back to me from the 50 or so participants that participated in that survey. So they talked about things like advocacy, my passion for staff development, the way I represent the school externally, my work on strategy. You know, so for me, these are all key strengths, which leads into us, I think, understanding those leads into that authenticity. What do you think your key strengths are?
People first, and when I say people, it's students as well at the heart of the matter. You know, sometimes I think that we can get so caught up in the theoretical or the what should happen, and we need to strip it all back and just get back to the people and the relationships that sit behind that. That's a deep driver for me. You know, coming back from 5 months of parental leave, I missed the people. I missed everyone. I missed knowing what was happening with our footy team, or I missed knowing what happened at the whole school staff meeting, or how the staff day went, or how the staff member that I was working on last year with their personal plan, how that's panned out, how our people going through further study are going with their subjects. You know, that interaction, it gives me so much energy. So selfishly, it's a strength, but I get a lot out of it too. You know, I think that's something that really drives me. I'd say that sits at number one.
Yeah. And I can see that. And so I think that sort of leads into my thoughts around if we are focusing on only doing what we can do, we're being authentic to our strengths and we're doubling down on that, how does that lead into the way that we're allocating our time and energy each day?
The cut through too, I think, is important, and that's something that we can quickly ascertain is it's important to consult, and we feel really strongly about that in the work that we do. People need a seat at the table. they need to be able to contribute meaningfully. And too many times I think we've been involved in the past in situations where it's not meaningful engagement and it's not meaningful consultation. It's consultation for consultation's sake. So how do we meaningfully engage with everyone is tricky. How does everyone get a seat at the table? Not everyone always does, but stakeholder representation is really important. But then how do you cut through? Not everyone's going to be happy with that, but it's about that vision. How do we sell people on the vision so that even if they don't agree, they can understand the why? I think that's really critical when we talk about our strengths, because otherwise the conversation will just go round and round and round and we won't get anything done.
Right. You're never going to get consensus.
No.
You know, and we talk about alignment, and I think alignment is important. But you're never going to get full alignment either, because we're a complex human-centered school organisation. You know, you've got a lot of different beliefs, and particularly in our community, over 70 different nationalities, 35 different faith backgrounds. It's a melting pot of different ideas and opinions. And so we have to engage the community, get their voice, but then ultimately we have to make a decision.
That's best for all.
Right. So it's taking yourself out of the decision. It's not about ego. It's not about me. It's about what is best for the school.
And bringing people along that journey.
Communicating, explaining rationale, decisions. Yeah, really important. So if you think about practicalities though, Teagan, so if your strength is people, do you sit down at the start of each week and say, and be really systematic looking at your calendar and say, am I focusing on people this week?
Absolutely. So Michelle, my EA, and I, we sit down, numerous times when we can, but definitely on a Friday is our really specific calendar look, if you like. We look ahead to the week and we think, what's here that shouldn't be here? What's not here that we're missing? What needs to be here? And what are those really critical points in time? That could be from my meeting with you to meeting with a parent about a critical issue. It could be the regular meetings with my team. It could be exec meetings. You know, perhaps the biggest question that we reflect on is, the easy one is what's there that doesn't need to be there.
Yeah.
But the even bigger one is what's not there. And not meeting for meeting's sake, but how are we aligning here strategically? Is our strategic work progressing along, and does a meeting need to happen? Can it be another form? You know, we've tossed the coin a few times on, it's not just a meeting and getting everyone in the room, but can it be a work in progress update? Can it be a status update via Teams, a communication platform? You know, how else can we ascertain what we need, rather than it always just needing to be an hour-long meeting?
I've once heard someone say meetings are where good ideas go to die, and it's also where good people go to die as well. And obviously it's a bit tongue in cheek, but unless there's a purpose for a meeting, why have it? So I think we fall into a trap sometimes of just getting into a habit. We have to have a set number of one-on-ones with our direct reports. We have to have these committees meeting every fortnight for 1 hour or 2 hours. There has to be an agenda. And I think all those structures are really important. But that's not to say you shouldn't be looking at them with a criticality and a ruthlessness to make sure that you're connecting with your authentic self, your leadership style and philosophy, and investing your time and energy where it should be invested.
Then if we think about the flip side of that as well, if somebody has a meeting in their diary for one of us, it's likely to be, from their perspective, their most important meeting of the week.
True.
So how do we hold space for them, and how do we give energy to them in that moment, be present, be our authentic selves, and give them the best version of us?
True.
And I think that's how I can rationalise looking at my week to say, how can I show up? How can I turn up and be the best version of myself? And that doesn't mean put a face on when we're not feeling ourselves. Doesn't mean not be vulnerable and authentic about how we're truly feeling. But how can I give myself the best possible setup, if you like, to turn up and be the best version of me?
I remember a conversation we had last year, and it'd be interesting to get your answer now, given the fact that you're just back on deck full time after 5 months of leave. What percentage of each week would you be at your optimal best?
Not as often as I'd like.
No, but it's actually, if you think about it, like throw a figure out there. What, 40%, 50%?
Now or then? I look back then, I think, gosh, I've never been so fresh. I've never had so much sleep. Now it might be a little bit less.
Yeah.
But yeah, I'd like to say it's more than 50%,
Yeah.
but in reality, is it?
Yeah, I don't know. I reflect on it too, and one of my goals with my leadership transformation plan from last year was that I'd be at my optimal best 20% more each week.
And how do you do that?
Well, I think it's a combination of things, isn't it? It's looking after yourself. So if you talk about personal effectiveness, how can you be your best for 2,400 students, 500 staff, if you're not eating well, you're not sleeping well, you're not exercising? Sounds really simple, but when you balance that against the demands of the job and the demands of having a young family, there's only so many hours in the day. So something has to give. And I think that probably leads into, a lot of the reports we see around the well-being of principals and how that's declining over the years. Now, that's not to say it needs to continue to decline, because I think part of the solution is reframing the role of principal and really leaning into that distributed leadership mindset.
And it's a long career. If we think about principalships now, perhaps gone are the days where you're in a principalship at the same school for 30 years. Now, if we look at board tenures and what that's looking like, it's perhaps looking like for you and I, eventually in that position one day, we may need to reinvent ourselves 2, 3, 4 times in different contexts. That takes a lot of energy too.
Right.
How do you feel about that?
Well, yeah, it definitely creates some uncertainty, and I think a little bit of anxiety, because I think that's the other piece that sometimes is forgotten about people in these roles in schools, is it can be a really delicate balance around navigating the relationship with the board, because ultimately they decide on your contract of employment, and a lot hangs on that, particularly with a young family. The typical contract period in the independent sector is for 5 years. Hopefully, you're engaging with the board 2 years out from the end of that 5-year contract to get a sense of, is another contract on the cards, or do I need to start looking? And the other bit that creates that uncertainty too is in the role of a principal, you can be dismissed with no process.
Instantly.
Yeah. It can be just, listen, the board's decided to go in a different direction, or they've lost faith. See you later. And that creates another level of uncertainty which you have to deal with on top of a really complex and demanding role. So I think when you talk about do what only you can do, part of that is absolutely managing your personal effectiveness to the best of your ability. It's hard. But it's also communicating with the board or leading up. If you can't keep secrets, you need to be transparent, you need to be vulnerable, you need to admit mistakes, you need to celebrate success. But unless you have a really great dynamic with the board, you're potentially setting yourself up for failure.
I've had the privilege of being involved in the aspirant principal program of the AHESA Victoria branch with my colleagues, and we get to hear from principals, every time we meet about their experience, and they all share a really similar sentiment. The pressures of managing that element of the role are really tough, and we've seen that time and time again with principals who there's been a falling out, or there's been a serious incident, or perhaps not a serious incident, but there's just been a disagreement, and then they're left without a role. With oftentimes a family to support, a livelihood to uphold.
Right.
And you go from being the CEO of a major business. We can talk about schools being described as businesses perhaps at another time and how you feel about that. But it's true, it is a business. And as CEO, you're in one day and can be out the next. And that tenure, attention can weigh really heavily.
Yeah, we're very lucky here that we've got a fantastic board of directors who are so supportive and passionate about the school, but also about supporting you and I, Teagan, in our work. And so we're very lucky. But I think, we work hard at that relationship as well, making sure that we're providing all the information that they need in order to govern the school really, really well, and to ensure that it's here for another 159 years into the future. And we're in a great position. The school's thriving, so it's all positive for us. But in some environments, it can be a really challenging situation.
No secrets, as you talked about earlier. Making sure they have all the information and not drowning them in information too, because that would be easy to do. There's so much that you could update them on at any given board meeting, but making sure we have tight cyclical agendas can really cut through that.
Totally. And asking for help. You know, I think I mentioned admitting mistakes, but asking for help too, asking for advice. You can't know everything. And the idea of effective governance is that you've got a group of people who are overseeing the school and supporting the principal or the CEO to make the best decisions to get the best outcomes.
And that's something that we've talked about at length with the exec team, and why many of our colleagues have gone through and done some governance training is it's really important for them to understand, and for us to all understand, how schools are run and the governance that sits behind the school, because it's such a critical piece. And often it's the left to the principal and the director of business, or the equivalent of the director of business, to manage that as the company secretary. And it's kind of a hidden door, if you like, to the other exec members, and they're going, oh, what's going on? Or how does that work? Or how much time does that consume? And I know for you and for I and for our director of business, it's a significant amount of time. And for them to understand how it runs, how it operates, and what is consuming your time helps to paint that picture and narrative that you're not just off at 8 o'clock in the morning with your door closed for a subcommittee meeting. They're understanding, what does that look like? We invite them to strategic board days to have input, not just as observers, but to be there presenting different areas, not only in their portfolios, but also other areas of the strategic plan that they might be working on.
Yeah, 100%. Reflecting on your strengths in terms of people, and having been back on deck now for only a couple of weeks, we were joking before that, you're really, I hate the word, but you're really busy at the moment because everyone's really excited to have you back, as am I. But everyone wants their piece. They want their Teagan time, How are you managing that at the moment in terms of all the other things that you're trying to play catch up on, the strategy work that we're doing, overseeing the day-to-day operations of the school? I know it's only early days, but you must be feeling a little bit of overwhelm.
I want to sit down and I want to hear what's been happening, and there's been so much progress, particularly with the work on the middle school. And we've just, our newly appointed head of middle school sat down with on Tuesday, and just hearing the progress that's happened. I think I was off for just over 5 months is incredible. The pace that schools move at. And I think what I'm really trying to focus on is that I don't need to be updated on everything. I don't need the laundry list of tell me what you've done and what's happening. It's just reconnecting with people and taking the time to, the shocked face of students like, oh, you're back. How are you going? Running across this morning, I had a group of students running across the basketball court wanting to see photos and videos and hear updates, and just taking that time to reconnect. I walked away last week thinking, I didn't get around to enough people. I thought, great, my first week back, I'm on site 2 days a week. I'm going to be able to get down to Amici, which is our early learning centre, walk through Windjill, Prep 2, up through Verdon, 3 to 6, walk through the senior school. I'm going to be able to attend assemblies, a couple of events. I might even make it over to Williamstown. And I didn't do any of that. Because my door was revolving.
Right.
But it's focusing on, for me, it was focusing on those meaningful conversations that I had, and not going through, tell me about the last 5 months. It's really just reconnecting with people. How are they? What's happening in their world? What's important to them at the moment? And how can I help?
Yeah.
How can I be there to support them? But yeah, it's really challenging. Competing demands. Everyone wants a piece. Let's catch up.
Yeah.
Let's have a coffee. This morning I wandered around for half an hour through the cafe and through the senior school, and those passing conversations too, just getting my feet back on the ground. And even though it's been announced that, I'm back on deck, still the face that people might have missed the Teams message or the update, and they go, oh, you're back, how are you going? So it's going to continue to be challenging in terms of managing that time. But for me, it's taking the time with people.
Yeah.
But it's important.
And that, and that's something that only you can do, right? Because you are relationships focused. I think when I think about that with staff, just in particular as one of our stakeholder groups, one of the things that we're both heavily invested in is mentoring, coaching, and developing, if you like, individual career pathway or trajectory plans for people, and then supporting them on their journey, depending, irrespective of what their destination is. We want to grow people, we want to invest in them, and we want to develop them so that they can get to where they want to go. And not only have we invested financially in that and continue to do so, we invest a lot of our personal individual time in that, because we see it as something that's really important. And I actually think that that is one of those things that we do that only we can do. That's not to say there aren't other amazing leaders at the school who are of similar belief to us, but it's sometimes those individuals want to have time with us to learn about our experiences and to learn about our advice, or to listen to our advice about what they should be doing to advance their careers in different ways.
And it's that mobilisation piece too. You know, we can't be in front of every single one of our students every day in the classroom. It's just not feasible. But we can work with our leaders and work with our teachers to mobilise their efforts in terms of when we talk about shifting the needle. How do we move that? It's with our work, it's through our work with people.
Yeah.
And that's why I suppose I can really justify that time, because, and it's not all day every day, don't get me wrong, I'm not just sitting in meetings with a revolving door generally, but it is, how can we mobilise their efforts and how can we invest in our people so that our students can have the best outcome at the end of the day, which is really important.
And I guess that the spin-off of some of that work over the years, if we reflect on our own practice for a moment, is the investment of resources that we've done with our Learning to Lead leadership development program, a 6-month bespoke leadership development program for our staff that has had over 150 graduates, the development of our leadership principles, which clearly articulate what we believe about leadership, and then the practices that are associated with those principles that really enable tangible learnings to happen from staff right across the school, so that we have that common language of leadership, so that it does amplify, it does distribute, and we're all operating from the same base. And
the same thing with students, our Student Leadership Academy, giving them the opportunity, not just dropping in on a prefect meeting or a junior school captains meeting, but actually holding space for the conversation, the theoretical, but then also the practical.
So what are your goals, Teagan? Like, you know, in terms of if you're thinking about personal effectiveness, given this new life stage, you know, you've just had your baby, you've just come back to work full time, this career phase for you, you know, you're associate principal of a large independent school in Victoria. You will be a principal in the coming years. Whenever you're ready, you will be a principal. Where are you at in your thinking around how do I navigate this new world that I'm operating in?
Get some more sleep might be one goal. It's a really good question, and I haven't really thought about it, to be honest. So thanks for putting me on the spot. To be my best self in this new way of being and this new way of life, and you know, I'm very fortunate that my fiancé, he's taking some time off to be at home in term 2. Supporting him as well in what that looks like comes to mind, and being a present mum where I can be, but also giving my best self to school and to work and to the people that we're so blessed to work with every day. Not only working on the school but in the school, and continuing to be present and visible, but also delivering on. We've got a new strategic plan, which is really exciting. You know, having a few key deliverables that we can produce and that I can produce certainly come to mind. I need to get back into Teagan mode. You know, I think I'm sitting between what does that mean? Who am I in this new phase? I think that I didn't realise that over half of our parent population were walking around with foggy glasses on from a lack of sleep. And I'm thinking, how does everyone operate within this? I used to like my 8 hours at least and get up and take the pugs for a walk and go to gym and have completed perhaps 10 things before I get to school at 7 o'clock or 7:30 in the morning. But that's going to change for me now. So how I carve time out for me is going to be important so that I can continue to show up for you and for the school. And I think just giving myself a bit of grace, which is hard.
Be kind to yourself, you know.
Yeah.
Teagan as mum is more important, I would say, at this point of your life, perhaps always from this point on, than Teagan the principal. You can have both. It's a really interesting conversation that we could get into if we had more time around, because you said you want both. You want the career and you want to be a mum. Some people say you can. Some people say you can't. It'd be a really fascinating conversation for us to get into if we had more time.
And we're throwing a bit of study in there as well, which is another loose goal of if I'm going to continue on this PhD pathway, which is happening. Just need to get the writing done, but perhaps that's a conversation for another day. But
It's a bit more than a bit of study.
But your goals, what's on your mind?
I want to be my optimal best more. Not to say that my suboptimal best is bad. I don't think it is.
No.
But I think you would notice that, with the operating flows and cadence of life and, fluctuating energy levels and sleep and, the ups and downs of just the everyday, I'm not at my best as much as what I would like. Now, for me, I think that means I'm not exercising enough because I find a really great grounding in emotionally as much as physically in my exercise. And for the last 12 months in particular, I've hardly done any. So for me, I've got to find time. I've got to make it a priority. And just by doing that one simple thing, I think I'll be much better for it.
And we've talked about programs here about how can we get a PT in for the day where staff can book in their session, getting in the pool, going for a swim. But it's actually carving. We can do that, and we've got I think bringing in a partner with the chiropractic team that we got in and the masseuse and it helped because we could carve some time out. But it sounds good in theory, right? It's actually blocking the time out in the calendar to say, I'm holding this as sacred. This is happening.
Got to make use of it. And there's nothing stopping us from going for a swim in the pool at lunchtime or from, going to the gym for a workout. And we will employ a personal trainer on staff. We're just renovating our gym at the minute. And so that'll probably be a budget discussion item for next year.
Does Nicole know this?
Nicole knows this. Nicole's our director of business. But I think it's really important. And I think you glossed over the fact that we do have allied health services now here at the school. So that was one of the things that we really focused on last year. We said, what are some of the things that schools could do that we really focus on the well-being of staff? And as a result, our well-being as well, Teagan, because it's not just about putting on the odd morning tea or having well-being week or, putting on the odd free yoga session and things like that. It's about what can we do that really shifts the dial. And so we've partnered with an allied health services team who are now set up residents here at the school, which means that our staff can access myotherapy, chiropractic, physiotherapy at any point during the day by just booking in when they're free and available. Now, they're the small things that we can do that help free up some time and enable people to then invest their time and energy in things that only they can and should do. I reckon that's a nice way to wrap up the episode, Teagan.
I think so too. We've got some lofty goals to hold ourselves to.
Look forward to following up on those.
Thanks, Adrian.
That's a wrap on today's episode of The Principal's Perspective. We hope this conversation gave you practical insights to lead with clarity, confidence, and impact.
Leadership is a continuous journey, and we'd love to keep the conversation going. You can find us on LinkedIn. Just search for Dr. Adrian Camm and Teagan Collins and let us know your thoughts, questions, or leadership wins.
Make sure to follow The Principal's Perspective on Spotify, Apple Podcasts, or wherever you listen to your podcasts. And if today's episode resonated with you, share it with someone in your network.
Until next time, keep leading with purpose, and we'll see you in the next episode. You can be sure to find any references, books, or resources we discussed today in the show notes. Please jump on into the comments and join the conversation.